information.
Yeah, and you're trying to make notes on each kid, and I just have to hope that I remember my shorthand.
Okay.
It's the triple.
Helen, those seminars were, you estimated about how long?
About 20 minutes each.
And you simply sat, listened, you did not have to say a single word. Can you just, from your point of view, describe what you had to do to enable those students in grade 9, and I'm going to say especially the boys, be so self-directed, self-motivated, self-monitoring, self-everything to have such a rich discussion?
Well, there's a few things. I think it's the expectation that kids can do that kind of thing. But this is the end of the semester, so that when they first come into grade 9, a lot of what we do is very teacher-directed. And then we move into sort of more group interactions with some teacher direction. And then this final unit, I guess you could call it, is self-directed. So they're given some tools along the way, but I think the most important thing in any classroom is that they respect one another, that they are listening to one another, listening to me, and that there is a lot of mutual respect in the room. And that starts from day one. And it's something that has to be worked on, and a lot of reminding of just proper behaviors. And then the learning becomes, I think, a lot easier for them. And then being able to voice their opinion without feeling like they're going to be judged, or that somebody might laugh at them or correct them, that they feel confident in speaking, and because they all have really good ideas. And they've done some presentations, the formal type of presentations, where they had to stand up in front of the class and speak. And again, the idea of respect is always an emphasis in my classroom.
But you did have to highlight those things. You did have
definitely.
to give them feedback in cases where students were not demonstrating those things.
And it has to be immediate, and it has to be done in a respectful way too.
So it is fair to say that when these students first came into your class, had we seen that task, we would not necessarily have seen those kinds of communication skills.
Oh yeah, I think they might have been sillier, or you know, I really do believe that all kids want to succeed, and they want to do well, they want to please, and to give them that opportunity and to know that I'm going to listen to each one of them and respect each one of them, I think is really important. So when a kid does get silly, like yesterday a kid threw a bag of chips across the room. He was just being excited, he was being a 14-year-old. And he said, I just wanted to give you the chips. You know, he was trying to give me a bag of chips, but he threw them at me. But I mean, I'm not going to yell at him. I called him over and we talked about that you don't throw a bag of chips at your teacher, even if you want to give them to them. So it's an ongoing process.
Of course it is. At the risk of making gender stereotypes, we partly expected that the boys group following the girls group would perhaps not be as engaged, not as passionate, maybe not as articulate, maybe not go as deeply. And yet, what was your take on that? Were you surprised? Do you see gender differences?
I'm always really pleased. I guess it's pleasantly surprised. Because when you do sit down to talk to the boys, they have just as much to say as the girls. And in a small group situation like that, I think it's easier for them. We didn't have any mixed groups this time around, and usually that's what happens. I have a predominantly male class, which is interesting. And it also comes down to their choice of novel. I think all of the kids were engaged with the book that they read. There was no kid who didn't like it. Now that's not always the case. Sometimes a kid gets in and into the book and they're not enjoying it. And that's unfortunate because, you know, I try and give them their choices, and so I think that's part of it, that they are engaged in their own learning, they pick something they like. And then the boys that you listened to had made a lot of personal connections, and we had talked about this quite a bit throughout the semester, and how to make connections and inferencing skills we talk about a great deal. So this is language that they're used to, and the whole idea of themes and thematic discussion, we start that in September. You know, how do you talk about a theme? What is a theme? And we go from, again, a very teacher-directed, here is a theme, and here's how you support that theme, to how do you come up with wording your own themes. Now, they're still a little bit cliche, some of them, but they're working through those concepts. So I think all those tools, and as far as the gender issues, I think the boys, they're great, and it is a second semester grade 9 too. So I think they've reached a little bit more maturity by this time. You know, first semester kids are different than second semester.
Just to clarify, the themes that the two groups identified, they had identified the themes themselves?
Yes, yeah.
Could you just comment briefly on the different kind of learning that you see demonstrated through a conversation such as that, as distinct from what you might hear from a prepared oral presentation?
Well, I think they are, you're going to hear more from them in, I think, an informal discussion. It may not be as well organized. It may not be as well supported, but if you listened, especially to the boys, all of them had page references. All of them had very specific plot references. So it was very evident that they knew the novel. So the knowledge portion was there. And then it was very obvious that they'd all thought of very different types of connections and could explain those and articulate them. And what I find is the huge difference between listening to students speak and having them write something. I think they still get very nervous and struggle with structure at this age, in articulating their ideas through writing. But when they're allowed to speak, they're much more articulate. In terms of the formal presentations, this class did very well with that, and we do it really, really early on. But it's very limited, and it's highly structured. So they're a bit boring, to tell you the truth. And with the spontaneous connections that they make, I think it's much more interesting for them. They're more engaged, and it's more interesting for me as well.
Just very briefly, the criteria that appear on the tool you were using for assessment, could you just identify in a word or two what specific criteria you were looking for?
Right, so I'm looking for inferencing skills, I'm looking for specific references to the text, I'm looking for connections beyond the text. I'm looking for their interpersonal speaking skills, so they're listening as well as, you know, you would hear kids start in on when somebody else was speaking and they'd apologize and say, no, you go ahead. And so those types of things. Listening to what other people have to say, and then being able to build on other responses or disagree in a polite manner. So it's both the stylistic issues of listening and speaking, as well as content and knowledge, and then being able to analyze what they've read as well. And that comes through both the, being able to use specific references, and then talk about what would motivate a character, why these themes appear.
And the evidence that you were gathering there as you listened and observed, will that be used for formative purposes, summative purposes, communicating, attempting to, or being part of their grade? Just talk about how you will use the data evidence.
This will be used for their grade, and it is for the oral component of the curriculum. So the rubric was shared with the students at the beginning of this, before they started reading the novel. And then when we talked more about the seminars, the students were given a sheet that says, what does a seminar look like, sound like, feel like, and they had to fill that out. And then they look at my rubric, which is all the teacher talk, right from the Ministry of Education documents, and then they match up what they're saying about what it looks like, feels like, sounds like to the teacher talk. And so that they know how they're supposed to exhibit these skills in the seminar. And then they also will tomorrow fill out a reflection sheet, sort of metacognition, how they did. And that goes into their portfolio, which we use later in their summative, which is also an evaluative piece, but it's based on metacognition.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry that these guys are so self-monitoring. Amazing.
Yeah, they were really good.
Honestly, please, I thank them, but honestly, again,
I'm
blown away by the working group, but also by those folks.
Yeah, they were being very good
And
today.
they no, honestly, Helen, that was so.
Put video cameras in all classrooms, right?
It's been discussed.
CCV, huh?
Oh, God.
Helen, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you so much. Have a lovely trip, too.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
We're off to China this summer. Yeah.
Fabulous. We'll keep you posted
Yeah.
as a contributing